I stood on my own front porch, holding my two grandchildren's trembling hands, while my husband of 40 years slid divorce papers toward me. Beside him, a woman young enough to be our daughter folded her arms and smiled as though she'd already won. "Pack your bags," she said. "This house has no room for a leech." I looked from her polished smile to my husband's empty eyes. Less than an hour earlier, I'd learned I had inherited $24 million and a skyscraper in Manhattan. The news was still tucked inside my purse in a thick envelope that neither of them noticed. Instead of crying, I smiled. "What's so funny?" she snapped. I took a slow breath, met her eyes, and answered, "Actually, this house belongs to—" But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how an ordinary 62-year-old grandmother ended up standing on that porch with the biggest secret of her life, resting quietly against my hip. My name is Margaret Carter, though almost everyone calls me Maggie. If you'd met me the week before all this happened, you probably wouldn't have looked twice. I worked 3 afternoons a week at the public library in our town in Westchester County, New York. I loved helping children discover books and retirees find new authors. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave my days purpose. For 40 years, my husband Richard and I had built what I believed was a respectable life. We hadn't started with much. Our first apartment had peeling paper, a refrigerator that rattled all night, and exactly 2 lawn chairs serving as dining room furniture. Richard had dreamed of owning a construction company, and I believed in him enough to work double shifts at a doctor's office while he got his business off the ground. But there were years when I balanced the books after putting our children to bed. Years when I skipped buying myself a winter coat because the company needed another truck. Years when I smiled through worry so Richard wouldn't lose confidence. Eventually, his business succeeded. People praised him for being self-made. I never corrected them. That wasn't because I wanted recognition. Marriage isn't supposed to keep score. At least that's what I believed. Our daughter Emily was now 38, raising 2 wonderful children after a painful divorce. Money was always tight for her, but she refused to complain. She worked hard as a physical therapist and somehow still found time to bake cookies for every school fundraiser. Our son Ben was 35 and taught American history at a public high school. He loved his students the way good teachers always do. He often joked that history wasn't really about dates, it was about choices. I thought about that sentence often after everything changed. On the morning my life turned upside down, nothing seemed unusual. I shelved books until noon, chatted with Mrs. Delaney about a mystery novel she'd just finished, and laughed with a little boy who proudly announced he'd finally learned to read chapter books. Around 1, my cell phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I let unknown callers go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Mrs. Margaret Carter," a calm man's voice asked. "This is she. My name is David Rosen. I'm an estate attorney in Manhattan. I'm calling regarding your great-aunt Eleanor Whitmore." I nearly dropped the phone. "My great-aunt Eleanor?" "Yes, ma'am." I hadn't seen Aunt Eleanor in years. She was one of those fascinating relatives children whispered about during holiday dinners. She'd never married, wore elegant hats, even in ordinary weather, and somehow turned real estate investments into an extraordinary fortune. Family gossip claimed she owned buildings all over New York City, though nobody seemed to know exactly how many. She'd gradually withdrawn from family gatherings after my grandmother passed away. Life simply drifted us apart. I'm afraid you've reached me too late," I said quietly. "We haven't spoken in years. I'm very sorry to inform you that Miss Whitmore passed away 3 weeks ago." I closed my eyes. Even when someone lives a long life, death still lands with surprising weight. "I'm sorry to hear that. There is, however, another reason for my call." He paused. "You've been named the principal beneficiary of her estate." For several seconds, I honestly believed he'd confused me with another Margaret Carter. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake." He explained that the will had been reviewed multiple times, every legal requirement satisfied. Then he calmly listed what Aunt Eleanor had left me. $24 million. A historic office skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Majority control of a charitable foundation she had established decades earlier. I couldn't speak. The library around me faded into silence. Finally, I whispered, "Why me?" "I'm afraid I can't fully answer that over the phone. Miss Whitmore left a personal letter that may explain her decision. We'd like you to come to our office tomorrow morning." I leaned against a bookshelf because my knees suddenly felt weak. "There is one request. Anything. Until ownership transfers are finalized, we'd appreciate complete confidentiality. You have my word." After we ended the call, I simply stood there staring at rows of books. $24 million. The number didn't even seem real. Oddly enough, I wasn't thinking about vacations or jewelry or luxury cars. My first thought was Emily. She'd never have to worry about mortgage payments again. My second thought was Ben. His classroom constantly needed supplies that teachers usually bought themselves. Then I thought about Richard. Maybe this was finally our chance to slow down together. We'd traveled so little during our marriage. There were national parks we'd always talked about visiting. Small coastal towns in Maine, autumn drives through Vermont. Perhaps life was giving us one last beautiful chapter. I finished my shift in a daze before driving to pick up my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, from elementary school. The moment they climbed into my car, all my worries disappeared. Grandma Noah announced proudly, "I got a 100 on my spelling test." Lily rolled her eyes. "He already told 3 people." "I got 100, he repeated. "I heard you," I laughed. On the drive home, they argued about whose turn it was to choose music, then begged for ice cream. I promised we'd celebrate soon. Neither child realized I was silently imagining college tuition. Already paid futures made easier burdens lifted before they even knew they existed. As we pulled into my neighborhood, I noticed something unusual. 2 expensive luxury SUVs sat in my driveway. Neither belonged to Richard. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. "Grandma?" Lily asked softly. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," but somehow I already knew it wasn't. The moment I stepped out of the car, the afternoon felt unnaturally still. Even the birds seemed quieter. Lily slipped her small hand into mine. Noah reached for my other hand without saying a word. Children have a remarkable instinct. They often sense trouble long before adults admit it's there. Richard was standing on the front porch. He wasn't alone. Next to him stood a woman I'd never met in person, though I recognized her immediately from photographs I'd accidentally seen months earlier on social media. She was tall, impeccably dressed, probably in her mid-30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair, and the confident posture of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Her name was Vanessa Collins. She was one of the top real estate agents in southern Westchester. I'd heard neighbors mention her more than once. I'd also seen her name appear on Richard's phone, enough times for it to settle uncomfortably in the back of my mind. I had asked him once, "Who's Vanessa?" Without looking up from his dinner plate, he'd answered, "Commercial property agent. She's helping one of my clients." I had accepted the explanation. After 40 years of marriage, trust becomes less of a decision and more of a habit. Now, I wished I had questioned that habit sooner. Several cardboard boxes were stacked beside the porch steps. My flower pots had been moved aside to make room for them. One box actually had my name written across the top in thick black marker. Maggie, not Mom, not Honey, just Maggie. It struck me as colder than anything either of them could have said. Richard folded his arms. "You got here." His voice sounded almost businesslike. "I live here," I answered quietly. Vanessa smiled with the kind of politeness that never reaches the eyes. "I suppose we should get this over with." My heart began beating harder. I glanced at my grandchildren. "Kids, why don't you wait by the car for just a minute?" No," Noah whispered. "I want to stay with you." Richard sighed impatiently. "They don't need to hear this." "Then maybe you shouldn't have chosen today." He looked away. That tiny gesture hurt more than shouting would have. Vanessa stepped forward carrying a manila envelope. Inside were several neatly organized documents. She handed them toward me. Richard didn't. She did. That alone told me more about my marriage than any conversation ever could. "These are divorce papers," Richard said. Just like that. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of 40 years together, only facts. "I filed several months ago." I stared at him. "Several months?" "I wanted everything prepared before we talked." "Prepared?" Such an efficient word for dismantling an entire life. "When exactly were you planning to tell me?" "When the timing made sense." I almost laughed. Timing. I'd spent decades arranging my own life around his timing. Waiting until construction season slowed. Waiting until business improved. Waiting until retirement. Apparently, I had waited too long. Vanessa slipped her arm through Richard's. The gesture wasn't affectionate. It was possessive. I think honesty is healthier than pretending, she said. Her perfume drifted toward me, expensive and overpowering. Richard remained silent. She continued speaking as though she had every right. The truth is, Richard has outgrown this marriage. I looked at him. Is that how you feel? He hesitated only briefly. Yes, one word. 40 years erased by one word. I noticed Lily quietly wiping tears from her cheeks. Noah stepped closer until he was pressed against my side. My heart broke, not for myself, but for them. Children should never have to witness adults behaving this way. I crouched beside them. Would you two do Grandma a favor? They nodded. Mrs. Jenkins is probably gardening next door. Go ask if you can wait with her for a few minutes. I don't want to leave you, Lily whispered. I smiled as gently as I could. I'll be right there. Mrs. Jenkins had known our family for nearly 30 years. The moment she saw the children's faces, she hurried across her yard. Maggie, could they stay with you for just a little while? She looked from me to Richard, then to Vanessa. Her expression hardened. Of course. She took each child by the hand. As they walked away, Noah looked back over his shoulder. I love you, Grandma. I love you more. Only after they disappeared inside Mrs. Jenkins's house did I turn back toward my husband. Vanessa let out a dramatic sigh. Now that the audience is gone, she crossed her arms. I'll be honest. I wasn't expecting anything else. She smiled. Good. Then she looked directly at me. You've been living off Richard for years. I blinked. Living off Richard. I'd balanced his books, answered business calls, skipped vacations because payroll came first, sold my mother's jewelry to keep his company afloat during the recession. Yet somehow, I was the burden. She wasn't finished. You're old enough to understand when it's time to move on. Richard still said nothing. She gestured toward the boxes. We packed the essentials. The essentials as though 40 years fit inside 6 cardboard boxes. My photographs? I asked. Richard shifted uncomfortably. They're in storage. My mother's china. We didn't think you'd need it. Need it? That china had survived 3 generations. Apparently, memories no longer qualified as necessities. Vanessa gave an exaggerated shrug. You can always buy new dishes. I looked at Richard one last time, hoping, truly hoping, to see some flicker of the man I'd married. Instead, I saw exhaustion, cowardice, maybe even relief. I never wanted this to be ugly, he muttered. You brought another woman to our front porch. I know, no, I said softly. You don't? Vanessa seemed bored by the conversation. She glanced at her watch. Can we please finish this? She pointed toward the front door. You need to collect whatever's left and leave before dinner. I said nothing. She mistook my silence for surrender. Then she smiled wider. Pack your bags. She tilted her head ever so slightly. This house has no room for a leech. The words hung in the warm summer air. Mrs. Jenkins, standing behind her living room window, gasped loudly enough that I heard it from across the yard. Richard closed his eyes for a brief second. Even he seemed embarrassed, but he still didn't defend me. That was the moment something inside me became strangely calm. Not cold, not angry, simply calm. Because when people finally show you exactly who they are, confusion disappears. All that's left is clarity. I felt the thick envelope inside my purse. The attorney's letter, the inheritance documents, $24 million, a skyscraper, a new future waiting only a train ride away. Neither of them knew, neither of them suspected. And somehow that secret made their cruelty feel smaller. I looked at Vanessa, then at Richard, then back at the house we'd bought together decades earlier. Finally, I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile. It wasn't triumphant. It was the smile of someone who had just realized she wasn't the one losing everything. Vanessa frowned. What's so funny? I held her gaze. Then I answered in the calmest voice I'd used all day. Actually, I nodded toward the front door. This house belongs to me. Richard laughed first, a short dismissive laugh. Vanessa joined him almost immediately. Oh, that's adorable, she said. You really are in denial. I shook my head. No. Then I looked directly at Richard. You remember the recession 15 years ago? His smile faded when the construction company was nearly forced into bankruptcy. He didn't answer. You were terrified creditors would take the house. Now the color slowly drained from his face. I signed every document your attorney placed in front of me. I continued. One of them transferred the deed into my name to protect the property while your business recovered. Vanessa looked from him to me. What is she talking about? Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. You always said we'd transfer it back once things stabilized, I said gently. We never did. Silence settled over the porch. For the first time that afternoon, Richard looked genuinely afraid. Richard stared at me as though I had suddenly begun speaking another language. That's impossible, Vanessa said quickly, looking from his face to mine. Tell her she's wrong. Richard didn't answer. His silence told her more than any explanation could. You changed the deed, I said quietly. Your own attorney recommended it. You said it would only be temporary until the business recovered. Richard swallowed. I thought it had been transferred back. You thought. Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. She turned sharply toward him. You told me this house was yours. It was supposed to be. I shook my head. No, Richard. It was supposed to be ours. Neither of them spoke. I walked past the boxes without touching a single one. When I reached the front door, I took out my house key. It still fit. The lock clicked open with the familiar sound I'd heard thousands of times over 4 decades. Before stepping inside, I turned back. I'll have my attorney review these divorce papers. Then I closed the door behind me. For the first time in years, the silence inside the house felt strangely peaceful. I leaned against the hallway wall and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled, not because I doubted myself, because I had finally stopped pretending. 40 years of overlooking little disappointments had led to one enormous betrayal. The kitchen looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. My coffee mug still sat in the sink. A shopping list rested on the refrigerator beneath a magnet from Acadia National Park, where Richard and I had always planned a vacation after retirement. I looked at the magnet for a long moment, then I quietly removed it. Some dreams no longer belonged on my refrigerator. A gentle knock came at the back door. Mrs. Jenkins stood there with Lily and Noah. I thought you might need a hug, she said. I smiled. I probably do. She embraced me without asking questions. Sometimes neighbors who've known you for 30 years don't need explanations. The children ran into the family room. Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice. Are you all right? I will be. She studied my face. That's an unusual answer. It surprised me too. She squeezed my hand. If you need anything tonight, call me. I will. After she left, I made grilled cheese sandwiches for the children. Routine has a remarkable way of calming frightened hearts. Lily finally asked the question she'd been holding inside. Grandma, are you and Grandpa mad at each other? I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt people. Did Grandpa hurt you? Yes. She looked down at her plate. Will you still be my grandma? I reached across the table and touched her cheek. There isn't anything in this world that could stop that. She smiled for the first time since we'd come home. That smile reminded me exactly why I couldn't allow bitterness to consume me. The children spent the night in our guest room. Richard never came back. Around 9 my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar Manhattan number. Mrs. Carter, Mr. David Rosen said. Yes, I wanted to confirm tomorrow morning's appointment. I'll be there. There are several documents requiring your signature. We also have Miss Whitmore's personal letter ready for you. His calm professionalism steadied me. After we hung up, I placed the confidential inheritance envelope on my dining room table. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. $24 million. A skyscraper. The words still sounded impossible. Yet somehow they mattered less than they had earlier that afternoon. Money couldn't buy back trust. It couldn't erase humiliation. It certainly couldn't restore a marriage built on promises one person had quietly abandoned. Still, it represented something else. Freedom. The next morning, after Emily picked up the children for summer camp, I drove to the Metro North Station and boarded the train into Manhattan. I'd made that trip countless times over the years, usually for museum visits or Broadway matinees. This morning felt entirely different. As the skyline appeared beyond the Harlem River, I couldn't help wondering how many times Aunt Eleanor had looked at these same buildings while quietly deciding my future. The law firm's office occupied the 23rd floor of an elegant building near Bryant Park. Everything inside reflected understated success. Dark wood, fresh flowers, soft conversations. A receptionist greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Rosen is expecting you." David Rosen looked to be in his late 50s, wearing a navy suit and kind eyes behind thin-framed glasses. He shook my hand. "My condolences again for your loss." "Thank you." He led me into a spacious conference room overlooking Midtown. Several neatly organized folders waited on the polished table. "So," he said with a gentle smile, "shall we introduce you to your new responsibilities?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of signatures, explanations, and astonishing numbers. Aunt Eleanor's estate was even more carefully organized than I'd imagined. The Midtown office building had been fully restored years earlier and was nearly completely leased to law firms, architects, and nonprofit organizations. Its rental income alone generated several million annually. The $24 million wasn't sitting in stacks of cash. Of course, it consisted of investment accounts, municipal bonds, certificates of deposit, and carefully managed funds designed to provide long-term stability. Then came the charitable foundation, GREET. It funded literacy programs, housing assistance for senior scholarships, and neighborhood libraries across New York State. I smiled. She supported libraries. Mr. Rosen smiled back very generously. That somehow made perfect sense. Finally, he opened one last folder. "This is Miss Whitmore's personal letter." The envelope had my name written in elegant blue ink. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the pages. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "Dear Maggie, if you're reading this, then I've finally run out of time. You may wonder why I chose you. The answer is surprisingly simple. I watched. I frowned. Watched." Mr. Rosen nodded. "She anticipated that sentence would surprise you." I continued reading. "A family doesn't reveal itself during holidays or weddings. It reveals itself during ordinary Tuesdays. I watched you visit your grandmother when others found excuses. I watched you quietly help your neighbors. I watched you support your husband without demanding recognition. I even visited your library several times over the past decade." Tears blurred the page. I had no idea. Money magnifies character. It does not create it. The wrong relatives wanted my buildings. You never wanted anything. That is precisely why you deserve them. By the time I reached the final paragraph, I was crying openly. Mr. Rosen respectfully looked out the window until I finished. I had no idea she knew me that well. "Oh," he said softly, "she knew you remarkably well." He slid another folder toward me. "There is one matter we should discuss." "What is it?" "Given the size of your inheritance, privacy will be important. News of the estate settlement will eventually become public." "I understand. I would recommend saying as little as possible until you're ready." I nodded. There was one more secret I intended to keep. Richard still had no idea that while he believed he was divorcing a woman with modest savings, he had actually walked away from someone whose life had changed forever, and I wasn't sure yet whether that knowledge would ever come from me. The first thing I did after leaving David Rosen's office wasn't shopping. It wasn't looking at luxury apartments overlooking Central Park. It certainly wasn't buying an expensive handbag or making reservations at a 5-star restaurant. I walked 3 blocks to a quiet diner, ordered a cup of coffee and a turkey sandwich, and opened a yellow legal pad. For 40 years, I'd been the woman who planned everything from grocery budgets to holiday dinners, from children's college applications to payroll schedules during Richard's lean years. Oddly now, I had a different future to organize. I wrote one sentence across the top of the page: "Don't let money change who you are." Then I underlined it twice. That piece of paper stayed in my purse for the next year. It became my compass whenever life threatened to spin too quickly. The following weeks passed in a blur of attorneys, accountants, and meetings. I learned more about commercial real estate than I'd ever imagined. The building Aunt Eleanor had left me wasn't just another office tower. It had stood in Midtown Manhattan for nearly a century. Its limestone exterior had survived wars, recessions, blackouts, and financial crisis. Thousands of people walked through its revolving doors every weekday without ever knowing the quiet woman who now owned it. Every time I visited, I felt less like an owner and more like a caretaker. That suited me just fine. The property manager, Carlos Martinez, had worked there for 22 years. I've met a lot of building owners, he told me during one tour. They usually ask one question. What question? How much money can this place make? And I didn't. He smiled. You asked where the tenants eat lunch. I laughed. I suppose I did. You also asked which employees had worked here the longest. People matter. He nodded approvingly. I think Miss Whitmore chose well. Instead of replacing experienced staff, I listened to them. Instead of raising rents dramatically, I approved gradual improvements that benefited both tenants and employees. 3. The lobby received better lighting and more comfortable seating. The elevators were modernized. The aging heating system was replaced before another harsh New York winter. Small decisions, practical decisions, the sort of choices Aunt Eleanor herself probably would have made. Meanwhile, the charitable foundation held its first board meeting with me as chairwoman. I was nervous walking into that conference room. Most of the board members had known Aunt Eleanor for decades. Would they see me as an outsider? Instead, they welcomed me warmly. One gentleman in his 70s smiled. Eleanor always trusted her instincts. Another added, if she picked you, we're interested in hearing your ideas. My ideas were simple. Expand literacy programs. Increase scholarships for community colleges and trade schools. Support libraries in underserved neighborhoods. Create grants for senior housing initiatives. None of those proposals made newspaper headlines, but they changed lives. Emily eventually agreed to leave her private practice and become the foundation's executive director. I don't know if I'm qualified, she admitted. You've spent your entire career helping people recover, I told her. That's exactly what this foundation does. She accepted. Watching my daughter walk into meaningful work filled me with a pride no amount of money could ever equal. Ben became an educational advisor for the scholarship program. His experience as a public school teacher proved invaluable. I know exactly which students fall through the cracks, he said during one planning session. Then let's build something sturdy enough to catch them. He smiled. You sound like Dad talking about construction. The comment caught both of us off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I answered softly. I hope I'm building something stronger. At home, life remained complicated. Richard had moved into a condominium across town. Communication happened almost entirely through attorneys. His lawyer repeatedly requested that I vacate the family home while divorce negotiations continued. My attorney simply responded with copies of the property deed. The request stopped. Then another surprise arrived. My attorney, Linda Harris, asked me to meet with a forensic accountant. I think you'll want to hear this in person, she said. The accountant spread several financial statements across a conference table. I've reviewed your husband's business records, and there are significant irregularities. He pointed toward highlighted transactions. Corporate funds had paid for luxury vacations, jewelry purchases, a leased sports car, thousands of dollars in restaurant charges, all connected to Vanessa. I stared at the paperwork. I thought Richard was paying for those personally. So did he. What do you mean? The company paid. He slid another document toward me. There are also undisclosed investment accounts. I felt my stomach tighten, hidden from me and potentially from tax authorities. The room suddenly seemed smaller. My marriage hadn't ended because Richard fell in love with someone else. It had been unraveling beneath my feet long before I realized it. There were missing funds, questionable bookkeeping, contracts that appeared unusually favorable to certain subcontractors. The accountant looked at me carefully. Mrs. Carter, I want to be clear. I appreciate that. We're not accusing anyone of crimes. No, but these records deserve closer examination. I nodded slowly. Then let the records speak for themselves. That became my approach. No anonymous phone calls, no revenge schemes, no public accusations. If Richard had broken laws, the truth would emerge through proper channels. I had no desire to destroy him. I simply refused to protect him anymore. Several months later, local business news finally announced that Aunt Eleanor Whitmore's estate had officially been settled. The mystery heir was no longer a mystery. My photograph appeared beside an article describing the foundation's expanded community initiatives. The headline wasn't about wealth. It focused on literacy grants and scholarships. I appreciated that. Late that afternoon, my cell phone rang. Richard. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another call came, then another. Finally, I listened. Maggie. His voice sounded unlike any I'd heard before. You inherited Eleanor Whitmore's estate. I said nothing. He continued. I just saw the news. Another long silence. I didn't know. No, I whispered to the empty room. You didn't. The next voicemail arrived from Vanessa. Her tone was dramatically different from the woman who'd stood on my porch. Margaret, I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I almost smiled. The wrong foot. That was certainly one way to describe someone telling a 62-year-old grandmother to pack her bags. She continued, I'd really love to meet for coffee. I deleted the message before it finished. The following week, Richard began sending handwritten letters, not emails, not text messages, actual letters. He apologized for being distant. He admitted he'd handled everything poorly. He wrote that 40 years couldn't simply be erased. For the first time in months, I cried, not because I wanted him back, but because I finally understood something painful. He hadn't written those letters when he believed I was an ordinary retired librarian. He wrote them after discovering I owned a Manhattan skyscraper. That realization ended the last fragile thread of hope I hadn't even known was still hanging on. Money hadn't changed me. It had simply revealed everyone else. The first snow of December arrived earlier than expected. I stood in my kitchen, watching soft white flakes settle across the backyard. The same backyard where Richard had once taught Ben to throw a baseball, and where Emily had insisted every snowman needed a proper scarf. It was strange how a place could hold beautiful memories and painful ones without asking permission. The divorce was finalized just before Christmas. There was no courtroom drama, no shouting, no dramatic speeches, just signatures of judge, and the quiet ending of a marriage that had lasted nearly 41 years. When I walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in a very long time. Not happy. Healing isn't the same thing as happiness, but free. The forensic accountant's findings continued moving through the proper legal channels. Several months later, Linda Harris called. I thought you should hear this from me before it reaches the newspapers. I sat down at my dining room table. What happened? Federal auditors have opened a formal review of Richard's company. I closed my eyes. So, it begins. The investigation wasn't started because of anything you did, she reminded me. I know the accounting discrepancies had eventually reached the attention of regulators through routine legal disclosures connected to the divorce proceedings and corporate filings. No anonymous tips, no secret revenge, just paperwork. Sometimes the truth doesn't need help. It simply needs daylight. By spring, local business publications began reporting that Richard's construction company was facing serious financial trouble. Several commercial projects had stalled. Banks tightened lending. Longtime clients quietly took their business elsewhere. Then came civil lawsuits from subcontractors claiming unpaid invoices. One morning, Ben called. Mom, are you sitting down? I am now. The company filed for bankruptcy protection. I was silent for several moments. That business had once been our shared dream. I'd watched it grow from one pickup truck and a folding card table into a respected regional contractor. Seeing it collapse felt strangely similar to watching an old family home being demolished. Necessary, perhaps, but still heartbreaking. I never wanted this, I admitted. I know, Ben said gently. You just stopped carrying it. His words stayed with me. A week later, another piece of news spread through town. Vanessa had left Richard. Not quietly either. One of Emily's friends who worked in commercial real estate reluctantly mentioned that Vanessa had been seen attending charity galas with another developer from Connecticut. Apparently, he owned several luxury apartment complexes. Emily hesitated before telling me. I wasn't sure you wanted to know. I appreciate your honesty. Does it make you feel satisfied? I thought carefully before answering. No. She looked surprised. I don't enjoy watching people discover that selfish choices have consequences. But she hurt you? Yes, and Dad? Yes. I poured us both another cup of tea. Emily, revenge sounds exciting in stories. She smiled faintly. But in real life, it usually arrives looking a lot like sadness. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. I've made plenty of mistakes. Not this time. Several weeks later, my phone rang again. Richard. This time I answered. Hello. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Maggie, would you meet me? I hesitated. I don't think that's wise, please. There was a long silence. I don't want anything. Another pause. I just want one honest conversation. I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. It wasn't an expensive place. In fact, we'd eaten there many Saturday mornings during the early years of our marriage, when pancakes cost less than $2. The waitress recognized us immediately. Haven't seen you two together in a while. Richard forced a smile. It's been some time. She poured coffee and politely left us alone. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Age had changed Richard over the past year. His shoulders seemed lower. His hair had become almost completely gray. The confidence that once filled every room had quietly disappeared. Finally, he looked at me. I'm sorry. I waited. No excuses followed. No explanations, just those two words. I'm sorry for all of it. I folded my hands around my coffee cup. Go on. I thought success meant never looking back. His eyes filled with tears. I kept chasing bigger contracts. Bigger houses, bigger everything. He shook his head. I stopped noticing the people who made any of it possible. I listened. I convinced myself you would always be there. Another silence. I confused loyalty with weakness. That sentence hurt more than everything else he'd said. God, because it was true. He looked down at the table. When Vanessa came along, he sighed. She admired the version of me I wanted to believe existed. The successful businessman. Exactly. And I enjoyed being admired. He laughed bitterly. Turns out she admired my money even more. Neither of us smiled. I deserved that lesson. I watched steam rise from my coffee. You know what surprised me most? He looked up. You never tried to ruin me. I didn't need to, I know. His voice cracked. You simply stopped protecting me. There it was, the truth. For decades, I had quietly solved problems before they reached him. Balanced accounts, smoothed relationships, made excuses, averted mistakes. When I stopped doing those things, he had to face himself. I've had a lot of time to think, he continued. I keep remembering little things like what? The nights you stayed awake doing payroll. The birthday you canceled because one of my employees needed emergency surgery. He smiled sadly. I don't think I thanked you even once. You didn't. I'm thanking you now. I nodded. Thank you. Those words were nearly 40 years late, but they were sincere. Richard took a deep breath. I don't expect another chance. There isn't one. I know. I've forgiven you. He looked startled. You have. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I spoke slowly, choosing every word with care. I refuse to carry bitterness for the rest of my life. He wiped his eyes. But I also won't pretend trust can be rebuilt after what happened. He nodded. I understand. I truly hope you build a peaceful life. I'll try. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. Maggie. Yes, I always thought inheriting millions made you the richest person in the room. He looked directly at me. I was wrong. Before I could answer, he quietly added, You were richer than me long before your aunt ever wrote that will. He walked out into the afternoon sunshine alone. I watched him cross the parking lot, with slower steps than I remembered. For the first time since everything had happened, I didn't see an enemy. I saw an aging man who had traded away the best parts of his life before realizing their value. That wasn't a victory, it was simply the truth. And somehow the truth was enough. A year after, I stood on my front porch with divorce papers in one hand and the biggest secret of my life in the other. I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of the Manhattan building Aunt Eleanor had entrusted to me. The city stretched out in every direction. Yellow taxis drifted through the streets below, like tiny moving pieces on a game board. The afternoon sun reflected off glass towers, while older brick buildings reminded me that New York had always found a way to blend yesterday with tomorrow. I rested my hands on the stone railing. For a long moment, I simply breathed. When I first inherited this building, I thought it represented wealth, Binny. Now I understood it represented responsibility. Money can change your address. Character determines whether people are glad you arrived. The foundation had completed its first full year under my leadership. Instead of shrinking, it had grown. We expanded literacy programs to dozens of libraries across New York State. We created scholarships for students attending community colleges, trade schools, and nursing programs. We partnered with organizations that repaired homes for low-income seniors, helping older Americans remain safely in the neighborhoods they had spent their lives building. One of my favorite projects involved converting an unused floor of the office building into a nonprofit resource center. Every week, veterans met there for employment counseling. Senior citizens attended free financial planning workshops. Small community organizations, finally, had affordable meeting space in Midtown. Whenever I walked through those halls and heard people laughing over coffee, I thought about Aunt Eleanor. She had understood something many wealthy people never do. Buildings are only valuable because people fill them with purpose. Emily flourished as executive director of the foundation. Watching her confidence grow was one of the greatest joys of my life. She no longer worried about making mortgage payments every month. Instead, she spent her days helping other families find opportunities they never imagined possible. One evening, she stopped by my house after work carrying a stack of scholarship applications. She smiled. "Mom, do you realize we've awarded more than 200 scholarships this year?" I smiled back. "I was hoping you'd tell me that." She laughed. "You always pretend you don't already know the numbers. I like hearing you say them." She sat beside me at the kitchen table. "I think Aunt Eleanor would be proud. I hope so." Ben continued teaching history at the same public high school. Despite my encouragement, he refused to leave the classroom. "Mom," he said one afternoon, "some jobs aren't supposed to make you rich." "I know. They're supposed to make you useful." He agreed to oversee the foundation's educational partnerships, but only on evenings and weekends. "My students still need me Monday morning," he insisted. I couldn't have been prouder. As for Richard, life had become much quieter. After losing his company, he accepted a volunteer position with a non-profit organization that helped seniors navigate housing and financial challenges after retirement. When I first heard about it, I smiled. He had spent decades building office buildings. Now he spent his days helping older people keep roofs over their heads. There was something fitting about that. Family gatherings gradually became less awkward. The first Thanksgiving was difficult. Everyone measured every conversation carefully. The second felt easier. By Christmas, the grandchildren had stopped worrying about where everyone should sit. Children often lead adults back toward normally. One warm Saturday afternoon, the following spring, Emily hosted a birthday party for Noah, who had just turned 11. The backyard overflowed with balloons, folding chairs, hamburgers on the grill, and grandchildren chasing one another through the grass. Richard arrived carrying a carefully wrapped present. He looked at me across the yard. I smiled politely. He smiled back. No bitterness, no pretending the past hadn't happened. Simply two older people who understood that peace sometimes looks different than the future we once imagined. Later that afternoon, Lily, now 13, wandered over while I sat beneath the maple tree. "For Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." She leaned against my shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you ever really angry at Grandpa?" I looked across the yard. Richard was helping Noah assemble a new telescope. He laughed as the boy accidentally pointed it backward. For a long moment, I watched them. Then I answered honestly, "Yes, really angry. Very." "What changed?" I thought carefully before speaking. If I had stayed angry forever, I would have let his mistakes keep controlling my life. She considered that. "So forgiving someone isn't saying what they did was okay." "No, it's saying you won't let what they did decide who you become." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand. I hope you won't need that lesson for many years." She hugged me. "I'll remember it anyway." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I found Aunt Eleanor's letter in my desk drawer. The paper had become slightly worn from being read so many times. One sentence still stood out above all the others. "Money magnifies character. It does not create it." She had been right. Richard's money had magnified his pride. Vanessa's ambitions had magnified her greed. My inheritance had magnified the values I'd spent a lifetime trying to live by. Wealth hadn't rescued me. It had simply given me more opportunities to be the person I already wanted to be. As the sun began setting, I drove into Manhattan one last time that evening. I rode the elevator to the top floor of the building and stepped onto the rooftop terrace. The sky glowed with shades of orange and soft purple. Far below, millions of people hurried through another ordinary day. I smiled. A year earlier, I thought the greatest blessing I'd received was $24 million and a skyscraper. I couldn't have been more mistaken. The greatest blessing was discovering that my worth had never depended on my husband's opinion, my bank account, or anyone else's approval. It came from the quiet choices I'd made over a lifetime. The choices to work hard, to love deeply, to forgive without forgetting, to protect my family, to remain kind without becoming naive. Those choices became the richest inheritance of all. If my story has stayed with you, I hope you'll take a moment to think about the people in your own life who have quietly stood beside you through the ordinary years. Sometimes they're the true treasures we don't fully appreciate until life tests us. And if this journey meant something to you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts. Pass this story along to someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories about resilience, second chances, and the quiet strength that often comes with growing older. Thank you for spending this time with. I woke up bald on the morning of my 10th wedding anniversary. Not with a bad haircut, not with a patch missing, bald. On my pillow beside my head was a folded piece of hotel stationery in my husband's handwriting. Now you look just as ridiculous as the person you really are. What Ethan didn't know was that by noon, I was supposed to transfer $15 million into the investment company he said would secure our future. That night, while our friends and family raised their glasses to celebrate 10 years of marriage, I picked up the microphone. And I told them exactly what kind of man they were applauding. Part 1, the anniversary gift. The first thing I felt was cold. Not the ordinary kind that slips under the blankets in winter, but a strange, intimate cold against the top of my head. I reached up, still half asleep, expecting to find my hair tangled across my face. My palm touched skin. For one suspended second, my mind refused to understand what my hand was telling it. Then I sat up. The bedroom was gray with early light. The clock read 6:12. Ethan's side of the bed was empty, and the champagne bottle from the night before sat on the dresser, its ice melted into cloudy water. I touched my head again. Smooth in some places, rough in others. I stumbled into the bathroom and turned on every light. The woman in the mirror did not look like me. My dark brown hair, the hair I had worn past my shoulders since college, was gone. Uneven strips of stubble crossed my scalp. There were 2 small cuts near my right ear, and a raw patch at the base of my neck. A few strands clung to the collar of my sleep shirt. I gripped the counter so hard my fingers hurt. "No," I whispered. The words sounded childish in the empty room. I opened the trash can. Ethan's electric clippers were inside, tangled in a wad of paper towels. Brown hair filled the teeth of the guard. My hair. I ran back into the bedroom, and that was when I saw the note. It lay neatly centered on my pillow, folded once. "Now you look just as ridiculous as the person you really are." I read it 3 times. My first reaction was not rage. It was confusion, the kind that comes when cruelty is so deliberate. Your mind keeps searching for a less terrible explanation. Maybe Ethan had been drunk. Maybe this was some bizarre prank. Then I remembered the champagne. He had opened it just after 10, saying we should start celebrating early. I had only finished 1 glass, maybe part of a second, yet by 11 I could barely keep my eyes open. Ethan had laughed when I said I felt strange. "Big day tomorrow," he had told me, guiding me toward the bedroom. "You're probably just anxious." My stomach turned. I grabbed my phone and called him. He let it ring until voicemail. I called again. This time a text appeared. "Don't be dramatic. It was a joke. You'll understand tonight." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. A joke. 10 years earlier, Ethan had promised to protect my dignity. Now he had violated me while I was unconscious and expected me to attend our party as if nothing had happened. My hands began to shake. I wanted to shower. I wanted to scrub the sticky champagne smell from my skin, vacuum every strand of hair from the carpet, and put on a hat before anyone could see me. Instead, I called Rachel Kim. Rachel and I had met in graduate school. She was now an estate attorney in downtown Chicago, and the one person who knew every detail of my inheritance. She answered on the second ring. "Claire?" I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her voice changed immediately. "What happened?" He shaved my head. There was a pause. "Who? Ethan?" Another pause, shorter this time. Are you safe right now? The question cracked something open in me. I sat on the edge of the bed and covered my mouth. He's gone, I said. There's a note. I think he put something in my drink. Rachel did not gasp. She did not tell me to calm down. Listen carefully, she said. Do not shower, do not clean anything. Put the note in a plastic sleeve if you have one. Take pictures of your scalp, the clippers, the bottle, the glasses, everything. Then call 911 or let me call for you. I can't call the police over a haircut. Claire, this is not a haircut. Her voice was firm but gentle. If he drugged you and altered your body while you were unconscious, that is assault. I looked at the note again. For years, Ethan had trained me to minimize him. A cruel remark was sarcasm. A slammed cabinet was stress. A hand gripping my wrist too tightly was frustration. Every injury came with an explanation. And every explanation ended with me apologizing for making it worse. I'm supposed to sign the transfer today, I said. I know, $15 million. I know that too. And you are not signing anything. At 7:05, 2 Naperville police officers stood in my bedroom, while I sat wrapped in a robe. Officer Perez photographed the note and collected the champagne glasses. Her partner bagged the clippers. Did your husband have permission to shave your head? Officer Perez asked. No. Do you remember him doing it? No. Do you take any prescription sleep medication? No. She nodded and wrote something down. An ambulance took me to Edward Hospital. Rachel met me in the emergency department, wearing navy slacks, a camel coat, and no makeup. She hugged me carefully as if I might break. A nurse named Denise cleaned the cuts near my ear and drew blood for a toxicology screen. When I apologized for crying, she handed me a tissue. Someone humiliating you while you're unconscious isn't a joke, she said. Don't let anybody rename it for you. Those words stayed with me. While we waited, Rachel opened her laptop and logged into the trust portal. The $15 million my grandmother had left me was still there, untouched. I should have felt relief. Instead, an alert flashed across the screen. There had been an attempted login at 6:31 that morning. The verification code had been sent to an old phone number still listed as my backup contact. The phone Ethan kept in his home office. Rachel turned the screen toward me. He didn't do this because he thought you'd cancel the transfer, she said quietly. He did it because he thought you'd be too broken to notice what else he was doing. I looked at my reflection in the dark edge of the laptop screen. My scalp was exposed. My face was swollen from crying, but for the first time in years, I could see Ethan clearly. Rachel closed the laptop and looked at me across the hospital waiting room. Do you still have access to the shared tablet at home? I nodded. Good. Ethan probably assumes you're too embarrassed to think clearly. That gives us a window. The word embarrassed landed harder than I expected. I was embarrassed. Not because of what I had done, but because I could already imagine the questions. Why had I stayed? Why had I trusted him? How could I not have seen what kind of man I married? People often ask those questions as if cruelty arrives wearing a name tag. It doesn't. It arrives slowly. It starts with a joke at your expense, then a criticism disguised as concern. One day you realize you have spent years adjusting yourself around another person's moods. Rachel touched my hand. This is not your shame, Claire. I looked away before I started crying again. The toxicology results would take time, but the emergency physician documented my injuries and recommended that I remain somewhere Ethan could not access. I called my mother and told her I had slipped in the bathroom. But the lie lasted 12 seconds. Claire, she said, I'm your mother. Try again. I closed my eyes. Ethan shaved my head while I was unconscious. Silence filled the line. Then she asked, Where are you? Edward Hospital. I'm coming. Mom, Rachel is here. I did not ask whether Rachel was there. That was Margaret Hale, 67 years old, 5'4", retired elementary school principal, and incapable of treating urgency as a group discussion. She arrived wearing jeans, orthopedic sneakers, and the blue raincoat she had owned since the Clinton administration. The moment she saw me, she stopped walking. Her face changed. Not pity, not shock, grief. She crossed the room and held my cheeks between her hands. Oh, sweetheart, that nearly destroyed me. I should have listened to you, I whispered. No, her voice sharpened. We are not beginning there. Rachel explained the attempted account access and the need to retrieve documents from the house before Ethan realized we knew. Officer Perez arranged for an officer to accompany us. By 10:30, I was standing in my own kitchen, with a knitted cap pulled low over my head, looking at the remains of breakfast Ethan had left behind. Coffee grounds in the sink, half a bagel on a plate, the ordinary evidence of a man who had committed an act of calculated cruelty and still remembered to eat. The shared tablet was on the charging dock near the pantry. I entered the passcode. Ethan and I had used it for recipes, streaming, bills, and travel plans. His email account was still connected. Rachel stood beside me while I searched for Bennett Legacy Partners. Dozens of messages appeared. At first, they looked legitimate: investment projections, tax summaries, legal drafts. Ethan had spent months building a polished story around the company he wanted me to fund. He said it would be ours, a family investment office, he called it. Something that would preserve my grandmother's legacy while giving Ethan the opportunity to manage growth. Rachel opened the operating agreement. Her expression tightened. "What? You're listed as the primary capital contributor," she said, scrolling, "but not as the managing member. I thought Ethan and I had equal control." "You don't." She turned the tablet toward me. "The voting rights belong to a holding company registered in Delaware. That company was managed by another entity called VHC Development Group." I stared at the initials, Vanessa Harper Cole. Rachel nodded. Vanessa had worked with Ethan for 4 years. She was his director of business development, the woman whose name appeared in every third story he told about work. Vanessa landed the account. Vanessa fixed presentation. Vanessa understood how much pressure he was under. I had met her at Christmas parties and client dinners. She always hugged me with one arm, while keeping the other hand wrapped around her phone. Rachel searched the Delaware corporate registry. VHC Development Group had been created 7 months earlier, 2 weeks after my grandmother's estate entered probate. "They planned this," I said. Rachel did not answer immediately. "Yes. We found a presentation Ethan had shown me in March. The version he sent to me described conservative real estate investments, municipal bonds, and low-risk index funds. The version attached to an email between Ethan and Vanessa was different. In that one, the inheritance would cover outstanding debts at Ethan's consulting firm, purchase a vacation property outside Scottsdale, and invest nearly $4 million in a boutique hotel project owned by Vanessa's brother. My name appeared only under one heading: source of capital. I sat down at the kitchen table. He told me the Arizona property was for us. Rachel continued reading. "It's titled to the holding company. So Vanessa would own it? Vanessa would control it?" The difference felt academic. My mother moved quietly around the kitchen, filling the kettle, rinsing cups, doing the practical things people do when the emotional world becomes unbearable. Then Rachel froze. "What is it?" She opened an email dated 3 weeks earlier. It was from Ethan to Vanessa. Once she signs, she can't pull it back without exposing herself to the tax consequences. She'll panic before she fights. Vanessa's reply came 6 minutes later. "After the anniversary, we won't have to pretend anymore." For a moment, I heard nothing. Not the kettle, not the officer moving near the front door, not my mother's soft breathing. I read the exchange again. After the anniversary. Not someday, not eventually. They had chosen a date. Ethan had planned the celebration, invited our friends, booked the ballroom at the country club, and ordered a cake modeled after the one from our wedding, all while preparing to leave me. I stood so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. "I'm canceling the party." Rachel caught my wrist gently. "Not yet. You expect me to stand beside him tonight? I expect you to decide what helps you most, not what gives him warning." I paced toward the window. He drugged me. He shaved my head. He tried to access the account. And if he realizes we found the emails, he may erase records, move business assets, or destroy evidence. My mother placed a cup of tea in front of me. "Sit down, Claire." "I can't sit." "Then hold the cup." I did. The heat steadied my hands. Rachel laid out the next steps. She would contact the bank's fraud department, suspend all pending transfer instructions, preserve the trust assets, and file an emergency divorce petition with a request to prevent Ethan from dissipating marital property. A forensic accountant would begin reviewing his business records. I would not confront him. God clears throat. Not yet. My mother listened without interrupting. When Rachel finished, she looked at me. You don't have to hurt him back, she said. He deserves to be hurt. Maybe he does, but that is not your job. Her voice remained calm. Your job is to stop protecting him from the consequences of what he chose. I looked at the tablet again. There were more messages, more lies. One included a travel itinerary. 2 one-way business class tickets from Chicago to Lisbon, departing 3 days after our anniversary. Passenger 1, Ethan Bennett. Passenger 2, Vanessa Cole. No return date, no ticket for me. I stared at the screen until the last part of my marriage stopped feeling like a marriage at all. It had been an exit strategy, and I had been expected to finance it. By noon, Rachel had frozen every pending transfer, notified the trust administrator, and arranged for a friend's accountant to begin reviewing Ethan's company records. The divorce petition was being prepared, but it would not be filed until late afternoon, close enough to the party that Ethan would have no time to react. That left one problem. I still had to go home and face him. My mother hated the idea. He could be dangerous, she said as we stood in Rachel's office overlooking downtown Chicago. He thinks he already won, Rachel replied. That makes him predictable. Predictable men can still be dangerous, Rachel nodded. Which is why Claire won't be alone. A plainclothes investigator named Daniel would wait nearby, and the police already had my report. Rachel had also checked Illinois recording laws. Because Illinois generally requires consent in situations where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy, she warned me not to rely on a secret recording as our primary evidence. Instead, I kept my phone visible on the kitchen counter and told Ethan I wanted to record our conversation because I was too upset to remember everything clearly. Rachel expected him to refuse. He didn't. That told me how confident he was. I returned to Naperville shortly after 2. Ethan's black SUV was in the driveway, freshly washed for the party. Through the front window, I could see him standing in the living room, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked calm. That was the hardest part. He had drugged me, shaved my head, tried to access my inheritance, and then dressed for our anniversary celebration, as though cruelty were simply another item he had checked off his morning schedule. When I opened the door, he turned. His eyes went directly to the knitted cap covering my scalp. There you are, he said. I've been calling. No, you haven't. He glanced at his phone as if the device might defend him. I've been busy. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and placed my phone beside it. I'm recording this conversation. His eyebrows lifted. That's dramatic. I need to remember what you say. He stared at me for a second, then gave a small indulgent laugh. Fine, record it. He walked closer and lowered his voice. Claire, I know you're upset. You shaved my head? We were drinking. I was unconscious. You passed out. There's a difference. The old version of me would have argued over the wording. I would have tried to make him admit the truth, believing that if I could force him to acknowledge what he had done, then reality would become stable again. Instead, I watched him. He had always been most persuasive when he was afraid of losing control. His voice softened, his shoulders relaxed, and his face arranged itself into concern. I made a stupid decision, he said. A terrible joke. I was angry. About what? You've been distant for months. I've been handling my grandmother's estate. Exactly. Everything has been about that money. He moved closer. I started to feel like you didn't need me anymore. There it was. Not remorse, not shame. Just a new way to make his violence my responsibility. So you shaved my head because you felt insecure? He sighed. I'm saying we both contributed to the situation. I almost laughed. For years, Ethan had used the word both as a weapon. If he insulted me, we had both communicated poorly. If he disappeared overnight, we had both stopped prioritizing the marriage. If I discovered a lie, we had both created an environment where honesty felt difficult. He could turn any act of betrayal into a shared failure. I went to the hospital, I said. His expression shifted for half a second. Then the concern returned. You went to the hospital over this? They took blood. His jaw tightened. Claire, you had champagne. Of course they'll find alcohol. And if they find something else? He looked toward the hallway. I don't know what you think happened. Vanessa came here last night. He turned back too quickly. Who told you that? The doorbell camera. His face went still. Then he smiled. She dropped off materials for tonight, that's all. At midnight? We've been working on the presentation. For the investment company? Yes. The company she controls? That landed. Not visibly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it in the way his eyes narrowed. You've been talking to Rachel. I reviewed the documents. You don't understand corporate structure. I understand that I provide $15 million and Vanessa controls the voting rights. That's temporary. You never told me. Because you panic over details. He stepped closer, lowering his voice again. This is exactly why I handle these things. You get emotional, then you make decisions you don't understand. I touched the edge of the cap. His eyes followed my hand. You shaved my head while I was unconscious. And you're calling me emotional. He looked away. For the first time, his performance slipped. It wasn't supposed to become this. What was it supposed to become? A wake-up call. For me? For both of us. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, I'm still going to sign. His entire body changed. The tension disappeared from his shoulders. His mouth softened and he reached for my hand. That's the right decision. I forced myself not to pull away. I don't want to destroy what we built. You won't. He squeezed my fingers. Tonight can still be beautiful. We'll tell everyone about Bennett Legacy Partners. Then tomorrow we start fresh. Tomorrow. The day before his flight to Lisbon. I looked into his eyes and saw no hesitation there. He truly believed I would hand him my grandmother's fortune after he humiliated me, because he had spent 10 years teaching me that keeping the peace was more important than protecting myself. I need to get dressed, I said. His gaze dropped to the cap. You're not wearing that, are you? My throat tightened. What would you prefer? There's a wig in the guest room. I stared at him. You bought me a wig? He shrugged. I knew you might overreact. The cruelty of it was almost elegant. He had planned the humiliation and the concealment. He wanted to wound me, then control how the wound appeared in public. Upstairs, a long blonde wig waited in a box beside the dress he had selected for me, a pale pink gown with a high neckline and pearl buttons. I left both where they were. Instead, I chose a white tailored suit, the one I had bought for a foundation lunch in the previous spring. I applied simple makeup, fastened my grandmother's sapphire earrings, and wrapped a silk scarf around my head. When I came downstairs, Ethan frowned. You look like you're going to a business meeting. In a way, I am. At the country club, guests were already arriving beneath the chandeliers. Waiters carried champagne, a jazz trio played near the windows, and photographs from our marriage rotated across a large screen. In the restroom, I found Vanessa touching up her lipstick. She saw me in the mirror and smiled. Oh, Claire. Ethan told me you had a difficult morning. I removed the scarf. Her smile froze, then she recovered. Some women know when a marriage has run its course, she said quietly. Others need to be embarrassed into understanding. I met her eyes in the mirror. Did Ethan tell you the money arrived? Her smile returned. That was all the confirmation I needed. My phone buzzed. Rachel's message contained 6 words. Funds secure. Petition filed. He's locked out. From the ballroom, I heard Ethan tap a spoon against his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he called. Please join me in welcoming my beautiful wife. I folded the scarf, placed it in my purse, and walked into the room with my head uncovered. The room did not fall silent all at once. Conversation faded in layers. A few people nearest the entrance noticed me first, then turned, and the movement traveled across the ballroom. By the time I reached the center aisle, nearly every face was pointed in my direction. My mother stood near the back beside Rachel, one hand over her mouth. Ethan remained beneath the chandelier with a champagne glass in one hand and the microphone in the other. For half a second he looked terrified. Then the smile returned. There she is, he said brightly. Claire decided to surprise us all with a bold new look. On the projection screen behind him, a photograph from our wedding appeared. I was 28 wearing my mother's veil, my hair pinned loosely at my neck. Ethan was looking at me as though I were the only person in the world. 10 years reduced to carefully selected images, none of which showed what happened after the camera was put away. Ethan extended his hand when I reached him. I did not take it. His smile tightened. Before Claire says a few words, he continued, I want to thank all of you for being here to celebrate a decade of partnership, sacrifice, and shared dreams. He thanked his parents, his employees, and his clients. He talked about marriage as an investment, about loyalty, and about building something that would outlast us. Then he announced that we were preparing to launch Bennett Legacy Partners, a private investment company that would transform our family's future. Several people applauded. Vanessa stood beside the stage, holding her glass at chest level. Her eyes never left mine. Ethan turned toward me, and none of this would be possible without my extraordinary wife. He offered me the microphone. Claire? I took it. The ballroom smelled of roses, champagne, and lemon polish. When Ethan and I married 10 years ago, I began. We promised to protect each other's dignity. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I believed that promise. I built my life around it. Ethan leaned toward me. Claire, maybe we should save the personal stories for later. I stepped away. This morning I woke up without my hair. The room went still. Ethan laughed softly. Like I said, a misunderstanding. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the note. This was on my pillow. I read his words exactly as he had written them. Now you look just as ridiculous as the person you really are. No one laughed this time. Ethan's father lowered his glass. His mother stared at him as if she had never seen him before. Ethan reached for the microphone. That was private. I pulled it back. No, what happened to me was private. You made it evidence. His face darkened. The country club manager moved closer to the stage. Daniel, the investigator, rose near the exit. I went to the hospital this morning, I continued. Blood was drawn, because I had consumed less than 2 glasses of champagne and lost consciousness. The results are still being processed, so I will not accuse anyone of something the evidence has not yet proven. But the police have the glasses, the bottle, the clippers, and the note. A murmur passed through the room. Vanessa took one step backward. I turned toward the screen. Ethan also planned to announce tonight that $15 million from my grandmother's estate had been transferred into Bennett Legacy Partners. The screen changed. Rachel had replaced our anniversary photographs with corporate documents. My name appeared beside primary capital contributor. Vanessa's company sat above the controlling vote. Ethan told me this was a family company, I said. He did not tell me I would provide the money, while Vanessa Cole controlled the entity that controlled it. Every head turned toward her. This is a misrepresentation, Vanessa said. Rachel answered from the back. The documents are public filings and executed drafts. Ethan's voice dropped. Turn that off. I clicked to the next slide. The altered investment plan appeared. Business debts, an Arizona property, and Vanessa's brother's hotel project. Then came the email. Once she signs, she can't pull it back without exposing herself to the tax consequences. She'll panic before she fights. Vanessa's reply followed beneath it. After the anniversary, we won't have to pretend anymore. Someone whispered, Oh my God. Vanessa moved toward the exit. Daniel stepped into the aisle. You are free to leave, he said, but preserve your phone and business records. Counsel will be contacting you. She stopped. Ethan lunged for the microphone, but the manager caught his arm. Sir, step back. This is my party, Ethan snapped. No, I said. It was my money. I faced the guests again. Ethan told you tonight that we were transferring $15 million into our future. He was almost right. The next slide showed confirmation from the trust administrator. The money is secured in a new trust. It will provide for my mother, protect my future, and fund a legal and career transition program for women leaving financially abusive relationships. My mother began to cry. I am not giving away everything my grandmother built, I said. I am preserving it the way she intended, but a significant portion, and help women open bank accounts, hire attorneys, find housing, and return to work without asking permission from the person hurting them. Ethan stared at me. You can't do that. I already did. Rachel walked forward carrying a cream-colored envelope, and because today is our anniversary, I said, I did bring you a gift. She handed it to Ethan. His eyes moved over the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Beneath it were notices preserving marital assets, demanding business records, and prohibiting destruction of financial evidence. He looked up slowly. You planned this. No, Ethan, you planned this. I just stopped cooperating. His father stood. Is any of it true? Ethan ignored him. He looked only at me.
What did you do with my money?
The sentence hung in the room. Not our money, not the money. My money. I handed the microphone back to the manager. I did not take anything that belonged to you, I said. I simply stopped giving you what never did. Then I stepped down from the stage. For the first time in 10 years, I walked away while Ethan was still talking. For the first week after the party, Ethan called me 37 times. He left apologies at 2 in the morning, accusations before breakfast, and threats in the middle of the workday. Me in one message, he said he loved me. In the next, he said I had destroyed his company. By Friday, he had decided the entire situation was Rachel's fault. I did not answer. Rachel instructed me to communicate only through counsel, so every voicemail went into a folder, every text was preserved, and every attempt to draw me back into an argument became another record of who he was, when he could no longer control the room. I stayed with my mother in the small ranch house where I had grown up. The guest bedroom still had the same narrow closet and faded marks on the door frame where my father had measured my height. Each morning, Mom made coffee before I woke. She never asked whether I had slept because the answer was obvious. One Tuesday, I found her standing in the kitchen trimming roses into a glass jar. "Your hair is coming in," she said. I touched the soft stubble on my scalp. "It feels like sandpaper. It looks strong." I smiled for the first time that day. The toxicology report arrived that afternoon. It showed a sedative in my system, one I had never been prescribed. The amount was not enough to prove exactly when or how I had ingested it, but it supported my account and gave the police reason to continue investigating. Officer Perez explained the process carefully. "We have evidence," she said, "but evidence and proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, are not the same thing. We'll interview your husband and Miss Cole again." I understand. I did not emotionally. Part of me wanted the law to move with the speed of outrage. I wanted one report, one photograph, one medical result to make everything undeniable. Instead, the process moved through interviews, subpoenas, document requests, and contradictions. Real consequences did not arrive like thunder. They accumulated. The forensic accountant found the first major problem inside Ethan's consulting company within 10 days. He had used company funds to pay personal expenses, private club dues, travel, jewelry, and the deposit on the Arizona property. More seriously, he had pledged expected funds from Bennett Legacy Partners while negotiating loans and attracting 2 private investors. My inheritance had not merely been part of his plan. It had been the foundation of promises he had already made. Rachel spread the reports across her conference table. "He represented that the capital commitment was effectively guaranteed," she said. "I never guaranteed anything." "No, but he used a draft letter with your electronic signature." I stared at the page. The signature resembled mine, but the date was wrong. On the day listed, I had been in Milwaukee for a nonprofit conference. "He forged it. That will be for investigators to determine," Rachel said. "But the document is false." The consequences spread quickly after that. One client suspended its contract, another demanded an internal review. Ethan's business partner resigned and provided records showing Ethan had hidden nearly $800,000 in debt. Vanessa retained Clear's Throat, her own attorney. Within a month, she began cooperating. That hurt in a way I had not expected. Not because I wanted her loyalty, but because Ethan had been willing to destroy 10 years of marriage for a woman who abandoned him the moment the cost became real. According to the financial disclosures, Vanessa claimed Ethan told her I had already agreed to the transfer and that our marriage was effectively over. She admitted helping create the corporate structure, but insisted she believed it was legal. I did not believe she was innocent. I did believe she was frightened. Ethan had mistaken shared greed for devotion. One evening, while Mom and I folded laundry in the living room, she pulled an old envelope from the bottom drawer of her desk. "I should have shown you this years ago," she said. Inside was a letter from my grandmother, written in blue ink on yellow stationery. My grandmother had built her wealth through a chain of medical supply companies, but I knew very little about her first marriage. In the letter, she described a husband who controlled every account, monitored every purchase, and told her she would be nothing without him. She left with 2 suitcases and $43. Years later, when she created the trust, she added protections specifically designed to keep inherited assets separate from any spouse or shared business, unless the beneficiary received independent counsel. At the bottom of the letter, she had written, "No woman in this family should ever have to buy her freedom twice." I read the sentence until the ink blurred. For weeks, I had felt selfish for protecting the money. Some part of me still heard Ethan saying that marriage meant sharing everything, that caution was betrayal, that love required access. My grandmother had learned the opposite. Love offered safety. Control demanded proof. 3 months after the anniversary, Ethan requested mediation. He looked thinner when I entered the conference room. His expensive haircut had grown out unevenly, and his suit hung loosely at the shoulders. His attorney proposed a settlement. Ethan would waive any claim to my inheritance, surrender his interest in the house, and accept a reduced share of our marital assets. He would also issue a written apology. In exchange, he wanted me to tell prosecutors I no longer wished to pursue the matter. Rachel leaned toward me. "You are not required to make that decision today. I already know my answer." Ethan finally looked at me. "Claire, please." It was the first time I had heard fear in his voice without anger hiding behind it. "I made mistakes," he said. "But prison, losing everything, is that what you want? I don't control whether you go to prison. You know your cooperation matters. So did mine when you wanted $15 million. His face tightened. "I was under pressure. You shaved my head, I know. You let another woman into our house while I was unconscious." He looked down. "I know. And you still expected me to sign." He had no answer. I folded my hands on the table. "I may forgive you someday, Ethan, but forgiveness is a personal decision. Legal accountability is not mine to erase." His eyes filled. But I felt no triumph, only clarity. When the final divorce agreement was signed, 2 months later, we met once more in Rachel's office. Ethan looked at the short growth covering my head. "You ruined my life," he said. I closed my pen and stood. "No," I replied. "I stopped holding it together for you." Then I walked out with my grandmother's letter in my purse, and my future still in my own name. 1 year after the anniversary party, I stood in front of a mirror and trimmed the hair above my ears. It had grown back darker than before and slightly wavier, but I kept it short by choice. That distinction mattered to me. For months, strangers had looked at my hair and assumed recovery meant returning to the woman I had been. I no longer wanted to return to her. She had been kind, loyal, and patient, but she had also mistaken endurance for love. I wanted to become someone who could recognize the difference. I sold the house in Naperville after the divorce was finalized. Ethan surrendered his claim as part of the settlement, but I did not want to live in rooms where I had learned to lower my voice. I bought a smaller brick townhouse, 10 minutes from my mother, with maple floors, a narrow garden, and a kitchen window that faced east. Every morning, sunlight reached the table before I did. I returned to work gradually. The nonprofits board offered me extended leave, but routine became part of my healing. I started with 3 days a week, then 4, and eventually accepted the role of executive director for a new program funded partly through my grandmother's trust. We called it Second Start. The name was simple on purpose. The program helped women leaving controlling or abusive relationships open independent bank accounts, secure temporary housing, meet with family law attorneys, and rebuild employment histories interrupted by years of unpaid caregiving. We did not tell them what decisions to make. We gave them enough stability to make decisions without fear. At our opening ceremony, folding chairs filled a renovated community center on Aurora Avenue. The building had once been a credit union, and I liked the symbolism of turning a place designed to store money into one that helped women reclaim power over it. Rachel stood near the back, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Mom occupied the front row, wearing a blue suit and pretending not to cry before anything emotional had happened. Our first speaker was a woman named Tasha, a 32-year-old mother of 2. She had used one of our emergency grants to hire an attorney, place a deposit on an apartment, clear his throat, and pay for a medical coding course. She stepped to the microphone with her hands shaking. "A year ago," she said, I had to explain every grocery receipt to my husband. Today I signed the lease on a place with my name on it. The room applauded. Tasha looked toward me. You didn't save me, she continued. You helped me believe I was allowed to save myself. That sentence reached somewhere deeper than praise ever could. I thought about my grandmother leaving her first marriage with $43. I thought about my mother keeping the letter safe, and Rachel answering the phone before sunrise without once asking whether I was sure. Then I thought about Ethan. His company had been sold for a fraction of what it had once been worth. The proceeds went toward debts, investor settlements, and legal fees. He pleaded guilty to financial charges connected to the false capital documents and received probation, restitution, community service, and mandatory counseling. The investigation into the sedative and the assault ended in a negotiated misdemeanor plea. Beatty, it was less dramatic than the justice I had imagined during those first sleepless nights, but it placed the truth on the record. Vanessa avoided the most serious charges by cooperating. She lost her position, surrendered her interest in Bennett Legacy Partners, and left Illinois. I heard she had started over in Nevada, but I never searched for confirmation. I did not need to watch either of them suffer. Knowing they could no longer profit from what they had done was enough. 6 months after the divorce, Ethan mailed me a letter. It arrived without warning, forwarded from my old address. I left it unopened for 3 days, then read it at my kitchen table, while rain tapped against the window. There were no excuses. He admitted that my inheritance had made him feel small. Instead of confronting his insecurity, he tried to make me smaller. He wrote that shaving my head had been an act of rage and control, and that he had convinced himself I would forgive him, because I always had before. For the first time, he did not blame Vanessa, alcohol, pressure, or me. At the bottom he wrote, I am sorry I mistook your love for permission. I folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. I did not respond. There was a time when I believed healing required an apology. Later, I believed it required punishment. What I learned was quieter. Healing required truth, boundaries, and the willingness to build a life that no longer revolved around the person who harmed me. On the first anniversary of my leaving Ethan, Mom and I drove to Lake Michigan before sunrise. We carried coffee in travel mugs and sat on a bench near the water, wrapped in coats against the wind. She glanced at my hair. Still keeping it short? Yes. Good, it suits you. I smiled. The horizon slowly turned gold. A year earlier, I had looked into a bathroom mirror and believed Ethan had stolen my identity. I had thought dignity lived in the things other people could see. My marriage, my home, my appearance, the life I had carefully presented to the world. But dignity was never in my hair. It was in the moment I stopped accepting his version of reality. My hair grew back. My confidence grew back. My life grew back too. But none of it returned in exactly the same form. It came back stronger because it finally belonged to me. Ethan thought shaving my head would strip away my dignity. All he really did was remove the last thing, blocking my view of who he truly was. And if there is one thing I hope anyone listening takes from my story, it is this. Love should never require you to surrender your safety, your independence, or your right to trust your own mind. Forgiveness may bring peace, but accountability protects the future. If this story moved you, share what you believe Claire's most important decision was and consider subscribing for more stories about courage, consequences, and starting over.